When most of us make the choice to begin growing our own food, we usually start with a specific mental image that has been handed down to us by the world of commercial agriculture. You head out to your backyard, you mark off a rectangular area, and you instinctively reach for a hoe to carve a straight, deep line into the dirt. You drop your seeds in a single-file row, one after another, marching down that line like a column of little soldiers. Then, you move over about 2 feet and repeat the process. It looks organized. It looks like a proper farm. It feels like you are doing the right thing because that is exactly what you have seen on the back of seed packets and in old gardening books for as long as you can remember. However, if you stop for a moment and look at that garden bed from a purely mathematical perspective, you begin to see the underlying problem. You aren't actually growing a garden. You are replicating a system specifically designed for tractors in a space where no tractor will ever go. I spent the first decade of my gardening life trapped within this specific geometry. I would plant a row of lettuce, leave 18 inches of bare soil, and then plant a row of spinach. I told myself that this extra space was necessary for the plants to breathe, or that it made the garden easier to manage. But the reality was staring me in the face every single time I went out to water. When you plant in rows, you are primarily cultivating empty space. You are watering dirt. You are giving the sun direct access to the soil surface, which bakes the moisture out before the roots can ever access it. And because nature abhors a vacuum, that empty strip between your vegetables becomes a highway for weeds. You spend half of your Saturday hoeing the space between the crops just to keep the system looking like the picture in your head. It wasn't until I stopped trying to farm and started looking at the garden bed as a finite container of potential energy that things truly changed. I realized I was trading my potential yield for a type of order that didn't actually serve me. I wanted food security, not perfectly straight lines. I wanted a pantry full of jars and a freezer full of produce. But I was gardening in a way that guaranteed I would run out of space long before I ran out of appetite. So, I decided to test an alternative. I didn't invent this method. I just stopped ignoring the math. I set up 2 identical beds. In one, I kept doing what I had always done. Straight rows, standard spacing, and lots of room to walk. In the other, I applied a specific spacing pattern based on triangulation. The difference wasn't subtle. It wasn't just a 10% bump in production. The bed with the new spacing produced 3 times the harvest of the traditional row bed, 300% more food from the exact same footprint, just by changing where the seeds landed in relation to one another. To understand why that yield difference happens, you have to stop looking at the garden from your height and get down to the level of the soil. This is where the real story is written, and it is usually where the average gardener's plan falls apart. We have been taught to think of plants as individuals that need their own distinct personal space, almost like people sitting in a theater. We think if we put them too close, they will fight. So we give them that wide berth in the rows. But this approach ignores how plants actually interact with their environment. When you leave 12 or 18 inches of bare earth between your vegetables, you are creating a hostile microclimate. The sun beats down on that exposed soil, raising the surface temperature and baking the moisture out of the top few inches. That is exactly where the feeder roots, the ones responsible for gathering the nutrients your plants need, want to live. Because that top layer becomes hot and dry so quickly in a row-based system, the plants are forced to send their roots deeper just to survive. They switch from thriving to surviving. You might be watering them every day, but you are fighting a losing battle against evaporation. This is the fundamental flaw in the model we were all taught. The failure isn't the color of your thumb, it is the geometry. By exposing the soil, you are essentially telling the plant that it lives in a desert. Even if you live in a temperate zone, the plant reacts by slowing down. It conserves energy. It doesn't fruit as heavily because it doesn't feel safe enough to support a large harvest. It is just trying to make it through the heat of the day. There is another piece to this that we often overlook, and that is the concept of solar capture. Every ray of sunlight that hits the bare dirt is wasted energy. That is energy that should have been captured by a leaf and turned into sugar, which then turns into a tomato or a pepper. In a row garden, you might be letting 50% of the available solar energy hit the ground. Not only is that a waste of potential growth, but that sunlight is actually working against you by waking up weed seeds that are dormant in the soil. Nature is trying to cover that ground. If you don't do it with a crop, nature will do it with crabgrass and pigweed. The system I am about to show you flips this dynamic. Instead of fearing competition between your plants, we are going to use their proximity to create a living mulch. We want the leaves to touch. We want to shade the soil. We want to create a canopy that locks moisture in and blocks the weeds out. When you stop seeing density as a problem and start seeing it as protection, everything changes. The solution has a name, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. We call it the triangular offset system. It sounds technical, but it is simply the way nature packs energy into a confined space. If you look at a honeycomb or the seeds in the center of a sunflower, you don't see straight lines and right angles. You see a lattice of hexagons. That is the most efficient way to fill a surface, and we are going to apply that exact logic to your garden bed. This is not a gardening hack or a quick tip I picked up on the internet. This is a fundamental geometric framework that maximizes density without sacrificing the health of the plant. Here is how it works mechanically. In a standard row garden or even a grid-based garden, you are subconsciously thinking in squares. You put a plant here and another one directly behind it. The problem with a square is that while the corners are occupied, the center is empty. It is dead space. To fix this, we don't change the plants. We change the angle. We stagger the placement. Imagine you are planting a bed of leafy greens. You plant your first row with the seeds spaced 6 inches apart. Now, when you move to the second row, you don't put the seed directly behind the first one. You shift your hand over. You place the seed exactly in the gap between the 2 plants in the row before it. You are forming a triangle, not a square. By doing this, you ensure that every plant is equidistant from its neighbors. If you measure from the center plant to any plant surrounding it, the distance is exactly the same. You have maintained the rule of personal space. Every plant still has the room it needs to thrive, but you have eliminated the wasted corridors between the rows. You are nesting the plants together like eggs in a carton. This simple shift in geometry allows you to tighten the rows significantly without overcrowding the roots. Suddenly, you aren't planting a collection of lines. You are weaving a continuous living carpet in a standard 4x8 raised bed. This offset pattern doesn't just add a few extra plants. It allows you to fit significantly more biomass into the same footprint immediately just by refusing to plant in a straight line. But the increase in plant numbers is actually secondary to what happens above the soil once those seeds break the surface. Once the seeds are in the ground in this triangular pattern, the real magic begins to happen. But you have to be patient enough to watch it unfold. In the first few weeks, it looks deceptively similar to a standard garden. You see small seedlings surrounded by dirt, but because of the offset spacing, the geometry changes the moment the plants start putting on true leaves. In a row garden, the plants grow up and cast their shadows only on themselves or the empty path. In this system, they grow up and out, reaching toward their neighbors. This is where the concept of the living canopy comes into play. You stop seeing individual vegetables and start seeing a unified photosynthetic surface. By week 4 or 5, depending on the crop, the leaves of one plant will gently begin to overlap with the leaves of the 3 plants surrounding it. This is the critical moment. You have effectively closed the door on the soil surface. From this point forward, sunlight can no longer hit the dirt. If you were to stick your hand underneath that canopy on a 90-degree day, the soil would feel cool to the touch. It feels like the floor of a forest because the sun can't reach the ground. Evaporation slows to a crawl. You find yourself watering half as often because the plants are holding on to the moisture for you. They are self-regulating the humidity of the bed. This canopy also acts as the ultimate weed control. Weeds are opportunists. They need light and open space to trigger germination. By the time most weed seeds in your soil realize it is spring, your vegetables have already formed a dense green shield over them. The weeds simply get smothered before they start. You aren't out there pulling weeds every weekend because you didn't leave any room for them to grow. You have replaced the labor of weeding with the passive efficiency of shading. The garden becomes a solar collector where 100% of the light hits a crop leaf and 0% hits the dirt or a weed. This is how you get that massive yield increase, not by adding fertilizer, but by eliminating the wasted space and energy that usually leaks out of a traditional row garden. We have talked about space, but to really understand why this system works, you have to look at the fourth dimension of your garden. Time. A garden bed is not a static picture. It is a moving river. Most people treat planting day like a grand opening where everything goes into the ground at once and then they wait. They plant a tomato, and 6 inches away, they plant another tomato. For the next 2 months, the space between them is empty, just waiting for the plants to get big enough to fill it. That is weeks of wasted sunlight and wasted soil potential. In the triangular offset system, we don't just stack plants in space. We stack them in time. We treat the growing season like a relay race where the baton is constantly being passed from one crop to the next, often before the first one has even finished. Imagine that same bed we just discussed. You have mapped out your triangles for your main crop, let's say peppers, which are slow growers that won't reach full size until midsummer. You plant your pepper seedlings in their offset spots. But instead of leaving the triangles between them empty, you immediately fill those gaps with a fast crop. I'm talking about radishes, spinach, or baby lettuce, plants that go from seed to harvest in 30 to 45 days. These fast crops act as a temporary living mulch. They cover the soil, holding in moisture for the baby peppers, and they suppress weeds during those critical early weeks. The peppers don't mind because they are still small. They aren't competing for light yet. Here is where the timing clicks into place. Just as the pepper plants are starting to stretch out and demand more elbow room, your radishes or lettuce are ready to harvest. You pull the fast crop out for your dinner table, and instantly you have opened up the exact amount of space the pepper plant needed for its next stage of growth. You didn't lose a single day of production. The soil was never bare. You essentially harvested a bonus crop from space that a traditional gardener would have left empty for weeds to occupy. This cycle repeats throughout the season. As your summer crops begin to tire in late August or September, you don't wait for them to die before you act. You plant your fall seeds, kale, carrots, or beets, right underneath the canopy of the existing plants. You use the shade of the dying summer crop to keep the cool weather seeds moist while they germinate. By the time the frost kills the peppers, the kale is already 6 inches tall and established. You simply cut the old stalks at the ground level and let the winter garden take over. There is no tilling, no downtime, and no empty off-season until the deep freeze truly sets in. This is how you pull 3 or 4 harvests out of a single bed in 1 year, keeping the soil active and the pantry full. Let's go back to that side-by-side test I mentioned at the start. I know 300% sounds like a number written on a bottle of snake oil, but when I weighed the produce from those 2 beds, the math was undeniable, and the reason had nothing to do with luck. The traditional row bed produced a standard harvest for a few weeks, and then it stalled. The heat of July hit the bare soil, the plants stressed out, and production dropped off. The weeds moved in, and I spent more time hoeing than picking. That garden failed because it was exposed. The triangular offset bed told a different story. Because we fit more plants into the space using that honeycomb pattern, the initial harvest was naturally larger, about double the volume simply due to the geometry. But the real gain, the jump to 300%, came from longevity. That dense canopy we talked about kept the soil cool and moist. The plants didn't shut down when the temperature spiked. They kept flowering. They kept setting fruit. While the row garden withered in the August sun, the offset bed was essentially creating its own life support system. It produced for an extra month and a half because the plants weren't fighting for survival. They were protected by the microclimate they created. This is what I mean when I talk about reliability over abundance. The goal isn't just to have a massive pile of zucchini on one Tuesday in July. The goal is to have food coming out of the garden every day from April until November. That extra yield didn't come from a magic fertilizer. It came from stability. By bridging the seasons with density, you protect the plants from the sharp swings in weather that usually kill a garden. You are building a buffer. The raw garden is fragile. It is exposed to every shift in the wind. The triangular system is resilient. It creates a block of thermal mass and humidity that smooths out the rough edges of the season. That is how you get 3 times the food. You stop the garden from quitting early. When you look at a harvest like that, it is easy to get caught up in the bragging rights of the numbers. But for me, and probably for you, this isn't about winning a blue ribbon at the county fair. It is about what that abundance actually represents. It represents a subtle but profound shift in how your household operates. When you walk out to a bed that is dense with food, where the soil is cool and the plants are healthy, you aren't just looking at vegetables. You are looking at a safety net. You are looking at a lowered grocery bill and fewer trips to the store. You are looking at the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that if prices spike or shelves get empty, your dinner is already paid for and waiting in the backyard. This system gives you something more valuable than just tomatoes. It gives you predictability. You stop wondering if the garden will produce and start planning what you will do with the harvest. That peace of mind is the real return on investment. It changes the way you look at the future. You feel less dependent on systems you can't control and more grounded in the one you built yourself. Now, I don't want you to go out this weekend and tear up your entire lawn. That is the fastest way to turn a joy into a chore. Don't try to convert everything at once. Don't try to master the whole system by Saturday. Just start with one bed. Mark out a small 4x8 section or even smaller. Pick one crop, maybe green beans or lettuce, and try the triangular spacing. Watch how the canopy closes. Feel the soil under the leaves. See the difference for yourself. If it works for you, expand it next year. If it doesn't, you haven't lost anything but a packet of seeds. Gardening should be a relief, not a race. Take your time, watch the plants, and let the system do the heavy lifting for you. This isn't about becoming a farmer overnight. It's about planting a seed of independence and watching it grow. If this breakdown of the triangular offset system has changed the way you look at the potential of your backyard, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. We are dedicated to uncovering the efficient, natural methods that have been overlooked for too long. Join us as we cultivate a more self-reliant future. Your next great harvest is just one triangle away.